It's a cold gray afternoon in the city. People rush by, heads down, lost in their own world. Among the busy crowd, a woman sits on the sidewalk. She's bundled in layers of old clothes, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. Her face is worn, tired from days without rest. In front of her, a small sign reads, "Hungry, please help." She watches as people walk by, ignoring her. Some glance at her, but most just keep going, too busy to stop. Her stomach growls, but she doesn't complain. She's used to this. Hours pass, and she still hasn't had anything to eat. The sun begins to set, and just when she thinks it's another day of disappointment, she notices a man walking toward her. He's dressed in a sharp suit, his leather briefcase in hand, looking like he's on his way to an important meeting. The woman's name is Laura. She wasn't always like this. Not long ago, she had a steady job as a receptionist in a small office. She worked hard, paid her bills, and had a modest apartment. But life had a different plan for her. One day her company downsized, and she lost her job. Without a safety net, without family to turn to, she was left with nothing. At first she tried to find another job. She sent out dozens of resumes, went to countless interviews, but no one hired her. The rejection wore her down. With no income, she couldn't afford her rent anymore, and her landlord kicked her out. She ended up on the streets, struggling just to survive. Days turned into weeks. Laura found herself wandering from place to place, looking for food and a safe place to sleep. The hardest part wasn't the hunger, it was the feeling of being invisible. People would walk past her, not even glancing in her direction. Some would give her a cold look, as if her presence was a nuisance. She learned to keep her head down, to avoid eye contact, hoping that maybe someone would offer a little kindness. But most days, no one stopped. No one cared. Laura had learned not to expect anything anymore. But still, every morning, she would find the courage to ask for food. She'd hold up her small sign, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would help her out. But most of the time, people just ignored her, continuing with their busy lives. It had become a routine for her. Walk the streets, ask for help, and face the disappointment when no one cared. Her hope, little by little, began to fade, but today felt different. As she sat on the curb, she saw the man in the suit walking toward her. Something about him made her pause. He didn't look like the others. He didn't look in a hurry. Maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. Laura wasn't sure what made her speak up this time. Maybe it was the look in his eyes, the way he wasn't rushing around like everyone else. She hesitated for a moment, but then, with a soft voice, she asked, "Excuse me, sir, can you spare some food?" She didn't expect much. In fact, she was ready for him to ignore her, just like so many others had. She had learned not to get her hopes up. But instead of brushing her off, he stopped. The man stood there looking down at her. He wasn't frowning or acting impatient like most people. He seemed curious. He set his briefcase down gently by his side and asked, "What's your name?" For a moment Laura was taken aback. No one had asked her that in a long time. She stammered for a second before replying, "Laura." The man smiled softly, and then asked, "Why are you out here like this?" Laura felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. This wasn't the usual cold, dismissive response. He was actually interested. She told him about how she had lost her job, how her life had spiraled out of control, and how, day by day, she was just trying to survive. She didn't go into much detail, but enough for him to understand the depth of her struggle. He listened quietly, nodding every now and then. Laura didn't know what to think. Most people didn't listen. They just passed by, pretending she wasn't there. But this man wasn't like the others. She wasn't sure who he was, but there was something about him that felt different. She waited for him to say something, unsure of what would happen next. The man didn't immediately offer her money or food, like most people did. Instead, he took a moment before speaking. "I can't just give you food," he said, his voice calm, "but I can listen." Laura was surprised. Most people just handed her a few coins and walked away, hardly giving her a second glance. But this man stood there, asking her to share her story. It felt strange, almost too good to be true. She had never met anyone who actually cared enough to listen. "I've had a tough life too," he continued. I know what it's like to be knocked down, to feel like nothing is going right, but that doesn't mean you give up. Laura stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. Was this some kind of trick? He didn't look like the kind of person who would waste his time with someone like her. He could be on his way to a meeting, making important deals. She was just a stranger on the street, yet here he was, giving her the time of day. Tell me, he said gently. What happened? How did you end up here? Laura took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long while, she spoke freely. She told him about her job loss, the loneliness, and how it felt like everything was falling apart. She even shared how difficult it had become to keep going, day after day, without any sign of hope. The man listened without interrupting. He didn't judge her, or make her feel small, he just listened. It felt like a weight was lifting off her shoulders, as if she could finally breathe again. After she finished speaking, there was a pause. She didn't know what to expect, but she felt like something was changing in the air between them. The man smiled at her, but it wasn't the usual polite smile of someone trying to get away. It was warm, like he genuinely cared. I know this isn't easy, he said, but I believe in second chances, and I think you deserve one. Laura blinked, unsure of what he meant. What could he possibly offer her that hadn't been offered before? She waited for him to continue. The man's words hung in the air. Laura wasn't sure if she had heard him right. Second chances. What did he mean? She was still processing everything when he spoke again. I can't just give you money and send you on your way, he said, his eyes steady, but I can offer you something else, something that might change your life. Laura was speechless. She didn't know what to say. She had seen people throw money at her, offering a quick fix to get them to feel good about themselves. But this man wasn't offering her a quick fix. He was offering something more, something real. Come with me, he said, nodding toward a nearby building. There's a restaurant just around the corner. I'll buy you a meal, and I want to talk to you about what comes next. Laura looked at him, confused. This wasn't something she was used to. Was he really asking her to go with him? Why would he do that? A small part of her was still skeptical, but another part, the part that had been starving for hope, wanted to trust him. Are you sure? She asked, her voice quiet. I don't want to cause any trouble. The man smiled, his expression kind. No trouble at all. I think it's the least I can do. You've been through a lot. For a moment Laura hesitated. She had been burned before, let down by promises and empty gestures, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her believe he meant what he said. Slowly, she stood up. Her legs felt weak, but she managed to gather enough strength to follow him. As they walked toward the restaurant, she couldn't help but notice how people were looking at them. Some stared in surprise, others whispered to each other. A homeless woman in a restaurant. It felt out of place, but at the same time, she didn't care. For the first time in a long while, she was being treated like a person, not an invisible outcast. Inside the restaurant, the staff greeted them with polite curiosity, clearly surprised to see someone like Laura walk in with such an important-looking man. They sat at a table, and the man immediately ordered a full meal for her. Laura was speechless, staring at the menu as if it were a dream. She could order anything she wanted: steak, pasta, dessert. She hadn't eaten like this in months. As she ate, the man continued talking. I know this must seem strange, but I believe everyone deserves a chance. You've been through a tough time, but you don't have to go through it alone. Laura could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had spent so long surviving on scraps, never imagining someone like him would offer her anything more than pity. But he wasn't offering pity. He was offering a chance, and as the meal came to an end, he had one more thing to say. After Laura finished her meal, the man looked at her with a steady, kind expression. She was still amazed by everything, by the warmth of the meal, by the kindness he had shown, and by how he had treated her with dignity. She felt like she was in a dream. But now, it was time for him to speak again. You know, I've been in a similar situation, he said, not like yours exactly, but I've hit rock bottom before. I know how it feels to think there's no way out, but I want to tell you something. Laura looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was going. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes sincere. I've built something over the years, a business, a company, and I don't want to just give it all away. But what I do want to do is help people who are willing to work hard, who are willing to take a chance. People who need that second chance to change their lives. She blinked, trying to make sense of his words. What are you saying? She asked quietly. The man smiled. I'm offering you a job. I want to give you an opportunity to work with me. You can start fresh, start over. You've got potential, Laura. I can help you. The words hit her like a wave. A job. After everything she had been through, the thought of working again seemed impossible, but something about the way he spoke made her believe that maybe she could. Maybe she wasn't done after all, maybe she could still have a future. He went on, explaining that he would provide her with temporary housing and training to help her get back on her feet. It wasn't going to be easy, he said, but if she was willing to work hard, he would be there to support her every step of the way. Take your time to think about it, he said, his voice gentle, but I believe you can do this. You deserve better than what you've been through. Laura was overwhelmed. She had never imagined something like this could happen. She had only dreamed of getting back on her feet, of finding a way out of the struggle, but now, here it was, an actual opportunity. The kind of chance she had been waiting for. She stared at him, at a loss for words. She had spent so many months surviving, just getting by, never believing things could be different, but now, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. With a shaky breath, she nodded. I'll work hard, thank you. The man smiled, satisfied. Good, we'll get started tomorrow. Days passed, and Laura's life slowly began to change. The billionaire kept his promise. He helped her find a small apartment to stay in, a safe place where she could finally rest. She didn't have to worry about where she would sleep anymore. It was the first time in months that she felt at peace. Her new job wasn't easy. It was a lot of hard work, learning new skills, and adjusting to a routine she hadn't had in so long. But each day, she felt a little stronger, a little more confident. She was learning, growing, and most of all, she was starting to believe in herself again. The people she had once passed on the street, ignoring her or looking down on her, now saw her differently. When she walked past them, they didn't look at her like she was invisible anymore. She wasn't just a homeless woman anymore. She was someone who had taken a second chance and was making the most of it. The billionaire, too, kept his distance. He didn't hover over her, but he checked in now and then. He was always there when she needed guidance, but he also gave her the space to find her own way. Laura appreciated that. He didn't treat her like a charity case, he treated her like an equal. One evening, after a long day of work, Laura sat in her small apartment, looking out the window at the city lights. It was quiet. She had a job, a place to call home, and a future that didn't feel impossible anymore. As she sat there, she thought about the billionaire. He had changed her life without expecting anything in return. And as she closed her eyes, she realized that the most valuable thing he had given her wasn't just a job, it was hope.